The sky over Jerusalem that morning was the color of old bone, pale, colorless, exhausted. It was springtime, the season of Passover, when the city swelled with pilgrims from every corner of the known world. The streets smelled of roasting lamb and burning cedar, of unwashed bodies pressed together, of dust stirred up by 10,000 sandaled feet. Somewhere in the hills above the city, wildflowers pushed through limestone cracks, indifferent to what was happening below. Jerusalem was always loud during Passover, vendors shouting, children laughing, priests moving through temple courts in white linen. But on this particular Friday morning, there was a different kind of noise in the city. A crowd noise. The kind that carries something ugly inside it. His name was Jesus of Nazareth. He had walked these streets before, healed the blind here, wept here, turned over tables in the temple courts in holy fury. He had spoken of love with the authority of someone who invented it. And now, after a night of betrayal and trials and a courtyard where a man named Peter wept into his hands, Jesus stood before the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, a pragmatic Roman who found no fault in him but handed him over anyway, washing his hands of the whole terrible business as if water could do that. The soldiers dressed Jesus in purple and pressed a crown of thorns into his scalp. They laughed, they spit, and then they handed him a crossbeam and pointed him toward a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. The question that hung over that morning, quiet as smoke, was this: could something so broken ever become something holy? The road to Golgotha was short but brutal. The crossbeam likely weighed close to 100 pounds. Jesus had already been flogged, a punishment so severe that men sometimes did not survive it, and his body bore every mark of a night without sleep, without mercy. He stumbled somewhere along the way, and a man named Simon, from Cyrene in North Africa, was pulled from the crowd and made to carry the wood. Simon had come to Jerusalem for Passover. He had not come for this. His hands closed around the rough timber, and he walked, and whatever he believed when he woke up that morning began to shift beneath his feet. At Golgotha, they drove iron spikes through Jesus' wrists and feet. The sound of that hammer. If you have ever heard iron strike iron, if you have ever felt that vibration travel up through the ground, imagine hearing it there, on that hill, with the city spread out below and the sky beginning to go strange at the edges. They lifted the cross upright, and the weight of his body fell fully against those wounds. Above his head, on a wooden placard written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, were the words, "This is the King of the Jews." Pilate had written it himself, and when the chief priests demanded he change it, Pilate said simply, "What I have written, I have written." 2 criminals were crucified beside him, one on each side. People passing along the road below hurled insults upward. The religious leaders, men who had studied Scripture their entire lives, watched from a distance and called out, "He saved others. Let him save himself." The soldiers gambled for his clothing at the foot of the cross, and one of the criminals, dying in his own agony, joined the mockery. But the other criminal turned his head, whatever that cost him, and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." His mother Mary was there, standing near the cross with a small group of women, Mary Magdalene, and another Mary, and a disciple named John. No words in any language are adequate for what a mother endures watching this. She had carried him. She had sung him to sleep in Bethlehem. She had searched for him in panic in Jerusalem when he was 12 years old. And now she stood where love required her to stand, even when standing there was the hardest thing the world had ever asked of her. Jesus looked down at her from the cross and said to John, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, John took her into his own home. Then, at noon, darkness fell. Not a cloud passing over the sun. Not a squall line moving in from the Mediterranean. Darkness. For 3 hours, from midday until 3 in the afternoon, the sky above Jerusalem went dark. The people who were there never forgot it. You could feel it, the way the air changes before a storm, but deeper, older, like the earth itself was holding its breath. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a voice loud enough to be heard across that hillside, loud enough that Matthew and Mark both recorded the original Aramaic. "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" It is the first line of Psalm 22, written 1,000 years before that afternoon, by King David, a man who knew abandonment. Someone ran and offered Jesus a sponge soaked in sour wine. And then Jesus cried out again, not a whisper, not a moan, but a shout, and he breathed his last. In that same moment, the curtain of the temple, a massive woven veil, 60 feet tall, 4 inches thick, the barrier between the holy and the most holy, tore from top to bottom. Not from the bottom, where human hands might have reached it. From the top, the earth shook, rocks split, and a Roman centurion who had overseen executions, who had driven the spikes, who had watched from the foot of that cross all day. This man looked up at what had just happened and said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." He was buried before sundown, in a new tomb carved out of rock, belonging to a man named Joseph of Arimathea, who had gone to Pilate and asked for the body with the particular courage of someone who knows what it will cost him. They wrapped Jesus in linen and laid him in the dark, and rolled a great stone across the entrance. And the women watched and noted where it was. Because that is what love does. It watches. It remembers. It refuses to look away, even when looking away would be easier. And the disciples scattered into grief like seeds thrown against wind. There is something about this story that will not let human beings go. Across 2,000 years, in every language and every culture that has encountered it, the crucifixion has landed in people like something they were already looking for without knowing it. Not because suffering is beautiful, it is not, but because here, in this story, the suffering is not wasted. Here, the worst thing that can happen becomes, somehow, the hinge of everything. We all know what it is to be in a moment so dark that the sky itself seems to have gone out. We all know what it is to feel abandoned in the place where we needed most to be held. The story of the cross does not explain that darkness away. It does not offer a tidy answer or a neat theological formula. It offers something stranger and more radical, a God who enters the darkness himself. A God who does not watch from a safe distance, but who bleeds, who thirsts, who cries out in a language of loss that every human heart already knows. The curtain tore from top to bottom. That detail has stayed in the human imagination for 2 millennia, and it is not hard to understand why. Something that separated was suddenly, violently, made open, and the stone rolled across the entrance of the tomb could not be the last word. The darkest day the world has ever known was not the end of the story. It was the door.